Well, welcome, Joselyn, to the Motherhood Podcast. It has been a very long time since I've seen you. It's been like 10 plus years, which blows my mind. And we're both mothers now. We're both
Yeah.
working. We're doing all the things. So let's just jump right into it. And
Mhm.
you have two kids, right? You're married, have
Yeah.
two kids. How old are they?
Yes, I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. So they're littles.
Oh, really? So great. Too. He's like right dab in the middle.
Yes. Yes. It was very interesting that like when I got pregnant, well, my first kiddo was like a Rona baby. So like everybody was getting pregnant or like around that time I was like, yeah, nobody had anything better to do. So
Popping kids out left and right.
yes.
So you also work. So you're doing
Mhm.
all the things. And how are you balancing? Because you have your own practice right now. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I'm a therapist, and so I have a private practice, and like I see people that are like federal cases, like court ordered, and I also see college students. So it's kind of like a mix, and then I'm also creating like a game or like an app for people to like have better relationships and like to help people that are can't afford therapy but want to help and work on themselves and their relationships. So it's a lot. It's definitely a lot.
Is, so do your kids stay home with you? Like what is the dynamic there?
So I kind of had to like make a give and take. Being a mom is a little bit of a big, definite life adjustment. It was interesting how I became a mom because I was kind of like just getting used to the idea of like I'm good, like I'm like I can be independent and do all the things, and I was working and living on the go, 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 and like kids really teach you to slow the hell down. And it's not sustainable to like work the Monday through Friday for me and like all of the things. And so I had to make a hard choice of I had to give up that security of working for someone else and having a steady income because me and my husband talk about it all the time. If I worked for somebody else, I would have been fired by now. I had to take off because the kids get sick.
Yep.
You have to things happen at daycare. You got to pick them up. Like, another employer would be like, "That's great, but you got to go because you're taking too much time."
That's true. That's why I started my business too, because
Yeah.
my employer, when I found out I was pregnant, was like, I'm not doing maternity leave. There's a little office in the back that we can turn into a nursery and you can bring your
Mhm.
kid to work. And I was like, whoa, what? Like,
First of all, that's illegal.
yeah,
Let's
like you
just
can't do
let's just
that.
make those things.
Like I'm like, dude, you should know the
Right.
law behind this. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's hard because there's a lot of mothers that they want to have that flexible job. They want to be able to work for themselves, but
Yeah.
they can't. So they're stuck
Mhm.
into this 9 to 5, going
Or
from job to
working multiple jobs, like, and not having any time with your kids, and it's crazy. It's
it.
crazy.
Yeah, you can't see them grow up or anything like that, and it's really hard. And no one. It's rare for someone to be able to start a business and for it to be successful, especially as a mom, because there's like it's already hard to start a business,
Yep.
like
All the things.
period. And then you have a kid, and then you add, the milestones, the sleep deprivation,
Yep.
all the attention that they need, daycare, like all the things. It's and
It's
so curious, like how did you like where did it even come from? Like you were like, I can't do a 9 to 5, I gotta figure it out.
Uh, kind of. So I was always I was the employee that like everybody liked because I did my work and I did it well. And so when other people slacked, it just got sent to me, right? And so I like it's both a blessing and a curse, but I also have like the mindset that I can look at structures, like I can look at like processes, and I'm like, oh, this isn't efficient, or like, and my mind works in like puzzles. So I see things like puzzles, and I was always at these jobs where I'm like, this is not efficient, this is not working, da da da. And so I would try to find ways, but because politics and work, so like I was, in the military, and then also I worked for Child Protective Services, and I also worked for, like I used to do bookkeeping and accounting, and so like I didn't want to be a therapist. That's a whole nother story in itself. I wanted to do HR and business because I'm like, I don't like people. So like I had to do my own healing journey and the doors
Oh,
kind of open. Yeah, that's a whole hot mess. But like basically, I felt always constricted in my workspace because I felt like I have a lot more potential to do more things. And I felt like a little caged bird. Even though I was a great employee, like it wasn't an issue, you know, but I didn't like politics in the workplace. I didn't like that I couldn't like use my creative skills or like, you know, one of my biggest needs is like autonomy or like being able to control like my decisions, right? And not be so confined, which working military and then CPS, like everything's very structured, you know? And I needed that. Part of my personality needed that because I'm like, you know, like I was, anyway, this is my personality. And so the reason I opened up my business was one, when I left CPS, I actually had to do an unpaid internship for grad school because of social work. Now they're changing the laws on that. Great for the newcomers. But if it wasn't for like having a healthy savings account, I wouldn't have been able to become a therapist. And I had my husband, we had that conversation, hey, we're going to have to make some cuts in places so that I can do this internship, you know, and then also take care of my son. And so it was balancing taking, he was a baby, COVID came out. I didn't want to be too exposed to things. I didn't want to keep him exposed to things. And it was a balance of like taking him to daycare and then working and doing the internship. And then also like it was a lot. And so he also got sick a lot. He was like almost a preemie, like right at 37 weeks. So he had like a lot of respiratory things, like, you know, like he got rhinovirus a lot. Like he ended up being hospitalized at 7 months because of just stuff like that. So I'm like, there's no way. Like the funny thing is when I was going to start my internship, he got hospitalized that very same day. At the hospital, I was going to start my internship. So I was like, guys, I'm here. I'm just with my kid. Yeah, so I had no choice. Like I really was like, I don't have a choice to work for someone else. And I really felt like, you know, I want to try to work for myself. I want to try to create like my own space and have the flexibility. And actually, having kids made me think that way, you know, because I think I would have still been working for other people and been unsatisfied. So,
Yeah. And that's crazy. That's a lot that's going. So this was just in a span of like 3 years then from when you
no,
started. No. Okay.
no, like it was like a whole, like I started with the internship. I was going to get a job. And what's crazy is that I didn't even plan to become a therapist when I became a therapist. You know, I was looking for a supervisor because being I don't know if people know the journey of being a therapist, but basically it's not just grad school. Like you have to do like residency. What people know is residency. You have to be under another supervisor for a few years. Then you have to get licensed, you know, relicensed. It's a hot mess. So I was reaching out to supervisors and I was just like, hey, like I need a supervisor, trying to figure out, do I go back to CPS as a supervisor there and do extra hours to do clinical work so I can get my therapy license? It's a hard decision. And all of a sudden it fell into my lap. One of the supervisors was like, yeah, and I'm looking for an employee. Do you want to work for me? I was like, and she was like, it's a contract position, not W-2. I was like, oh, that's excellent. Yes. Yes. Like I was, it kind of fell into my lap. And then like because of that, and I was able to get a supervisor, I looked for other contract work. So then I was able to get the other contract. Hence why I'm like forensic therapy with like court ordered here and
And then
college students here. They're different contracts, you know, like why do you do that? Different contract, different sources of income. And so I
mhm.
was able to like, hey, can flex my schedule. Like my kid's sick, canceling clients here, rescheduling over here, like it works for me, you know?
So
Yeah.
you not necessarily got blessed, but you were on kind of like this path of like I it revolves around everything revolves around kids. Like everything you do revolves around kids. So you were really trying your best to make sure that you were able to be with your kids if they do get sick, if they do all the things. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. Even the mom guilt. Like it's they go to daycare now because I can't see clients and be like, but hold on, my kid's crying. Like, give me a second. Be right back. Hold that thought. I know you're crying. I know it's special. Anyway, you know, like I had to still make that hard choice of, you know, I got to put him in daycare. I'm not, I'm making good income, but it's not the income I was making, you know, working for someone else, you know, because I'm literally working 6 times 18 hours a week. well, face to face with clients, I'm working 18 hours a week. And then I decided the days that I'm not working with face to face with clients, which is twice a week, I'm working on the app and the gaming and all of that stuff so that I can, when eventually when that rolls, be able to be with my kids, work when I want to, not 40 hours a week, part time. And it's a give and take, because even now I feel kind of like guilty because I'm like, man, like I'm working, spending time creating this app or creating these things, but my kids, the whole point is to be with my kids and they're not here, like the whole mom guilt is like a very real thing.
It's horrible. Like, and
Yeah.
I think there's also that illusion that business owners, like, we're just balling and work all these hours, or like it's either we work all these hours and are balling, or we work like 4 hours a week and we're still balling somehow,
Yeah.
some way. And I'm like, y'all, if y'all could see my bank, we're not balling like y'all think we are. I was like,
Still
I'm
in.
getting there, like especially if you're like new in this world, like you're not, like it builds up, like it's going to take
Yeah.
years to even get there, and that's, you
Yes.
have to put so much work into it, and that's like
Yes.
free work to make sure your business gets to where you would like it to be, and it's
Exactly.
exhausting.
Yes.
Like I'm tired, like being a mom, being a business owner, now that we're tired, and
Yeah.
I think people understand that, and that mom guilt, it it's intense, because
Mm-hmm.
even like, so Grayson stays home with me,
Mm-hmm.
and that's because daycare in Austin is ridiculous. Like, y'all, what are you doing with all this money? Because I honestly,
Right.
like, no way. And he stays home with me, and I try to work while he's napping, and or try to get work done when he's, sleeping, but there are moments where I have to get work done while he's awake.
Mm-hmm.
And there have been times where he like pulls on my shirt, and I'm like, "Bud, like I really got to get this done real quick." And he's just like, pulling on my shirt, and then he walks over to his little toys and he's like playing, and I look over, I'm like, "Oh, like it's just sad because you're just
Yeah.
like, I just like rejected him in a way, and he's just like alone, like playing with his toys." And I'm like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, bud." But
Yeah.
yeah, I don't think people truly understand, because, my mom's friends, like, they're like, "You're living your best life. Like, I wish I could be a business owner. Like, I wish
Sure.
I have my." I don't know. Like, if you guys knew what really goes behind, the
Mhm.
scenes, behind the closed doors, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
really hard. And like, especially like, you don't know if it's going to be successful or not. So you're taking
Yeah.
that risk
Yep.
and putting all this work into it, energy,
Yep.
time, money, because sometimes you have to put your own money to make sure the business succeeds.
Correct. Let's
And
talk about how you earn a paycheck and half of it has to go to the bills that it takes to operate
yeah,
the business. Like that's a whole real thing. And like people don't realize that, you know, all the money doesn't go into your bank account and Uncle Sam wants 30% of it. So not only 30%, I'm getting in like maybe 50% of my paycheck, you know? And and not to go into all the accounting part, yeah, you can do an S corp or whatever and get paid less or whatever, but like pay less taxes. But either way, like there's not enough mentorship in the business space for women and then minority women. There's also like the stigma that you deal with that you don't know what you're doing, that all this other things people try to take advantage. And so, you know, it's a whole nother world. You're wearing like the CEO hat of making sure your company runs correctly. You're wearing the accounting hat to make sure that your numbers look good, and they look right, and you're pricing things. You're wearing the HR hat to make sure that you're doing things compliantly with the law, even though you're a business of one. Like the IRS will come after you 7 years later because they're always behind, and then all of a sudden you owe $10,000 and you're like, how the hell do I owe 10? Like there's the stress of that. And oh yeah, if I don't work, I don't get paid.
that
I don't get
that
time off.
that's telling Josh, because I was like, because he owns a company, but he still has, a paycheck. Like, he doesn't matter if he's sick, if he takes vacation, like he will still make the same amount of money each month.
Yeah.
I, on the other hand, if I get sick, if Grayson gets sick, if I
Yep.
just want to take a day off, or even, a whole week, we do not get paid.
Oh, no PTO over here.
And I'm like, I told Josh like a few days ago, I was like, babe, I think I need a 9 to 5. Like, I don't know if I could do this anymore. It's exhausting, and I'm like, "I want PTO, I
Yeah.
wanna take vacations," like and then, yeah, you wear all these hats, you're doing marketing, accounting, finance, like, all the things, legal, like
Yep.
and it's so stressful because you're like, "I cannot mess this up because if
Yep.
not the IRS is gonna come after me or someone's gonna sue me," or, like,
Correct.
all the things, and then you're having to find more clients, and, like,
Yep.
it's stressful because then some of the clients are like, "Ooh, I can't like use you anymore. Like, I don't need your business anymore." And it's like, "Okay, let me go find." Like, there's no one. Like, you have to do the work, and it's
All of it.
exhausting. And then
Yeah.
so you
Hmm.
have to take that into account. Like,
Yeah.
not only are you stressed out about the business, any side businesses that you're thinking of, but you're also a mom, so you have to focus on like what's going on with your kids, like
Yep. Yep.
shoes, clothes, food, are they eating right? What milestones are coming up? Sleep regression, like all the
Yep.
things. And they
Yep.
never count that. But yet we're the ones that don't know what we're doing. Like we're the ones that can't be successful in a business. Like it just blows my mind. It blows my
Yeah.
mind.
Yeah. And what's crazy is like, this is not even talk. It's funny. I'm a therapist. I have PTSD and ADHD on crack. So the hilarious thing about this is people don't look at um, when people struggle with like mental health. And yes, like I know how to deal with it because of what I do and like learning. It doesn't take away the real effects of. I can't stand when my kid is screaming because of PTSD. Like, I want to throw you against the wall. That's a really real feeling that you don't want to have, right? So you have to remove yourself. Like, there are struggles that, the more I studied like PTSD, the more I study like trauma and like how the body responds to things, I'm like, the more I realize, I'm like, man, this is the whole Latin and Black culture that I know. You're describing our culture. You're not describing symptoms that people have here and there. I'm like, you are literally describing our culture. And I think like a lot of people that are Black and Hispanic minorities, where things get passed down, in your families, struggle with these things. And we don't talk about it because one, it's shameful. Nobody wants to talk about the fact that I want to like choke my kid out in my head. I don't do it, but because they're screaming and it really triggers something inside of me and I have to remove myself from the situation. Or dealing with the baby blues when you randomly have thoughts about like killing yourself because you just cannot with all the changes and stress, and you have to like be open about that with somebody and like, hey, like I haven't had these thoughts since I was a freaking teenager. Why are these things oh, because your hormones are out of whack. Like, those are the extra piled on things that we don't talk about, and I think that is a lot more prevalent in our cultures and in our society, but we don't talk about it enough, and it's
Yeah.
hard to be a mom that deals with PTSD and I'm overstimulated and I don't want somebody to touch me, and your kids want to touch you 24/7, and if it's not your kids, it's your husband, and if it's not your husband, it's the damn dogs, like get
Always
off me.
one. But I wanted to touch base because, you know, Hispanic, Black culture, people they do not understand unless they are Hispanic or Black. Like the trauma that we
Yeah.
had as children growing up, being raised, at least my mom's Puerto Rican. My dad was Puerto Rican. That family, I love them to
Same.
death, but they are crazy. And the way that they would raise us, I'm like, y'all, I don't even know what was going through your mind, like
Mhm.
that you thought that this was okay.
Yeah.
Because even now, as an adult with my own kids, I suffer from depression, anxiety, and extreme OCD. And
Mhm.
the OCD was just recent because I'm like, man, why am I like this? And they're like, you have
Mhm.
OCD. I'm like, oh, it makes sense now. And I would tell my mom, like, hey, I started seeing a therapist or I started getting help for X, Y, Z. And then she's like, why?
For
Like,
what? That's for
what?
crazy people.
You're crazy.
Why?
What trauma? Like, we don't do that. And I'm like, what?
Mhm.
Like, oh, you're on medication? That's weird. Like, we don't do that.
Yeah.
Or don't even tell
Because
anyone that you're going to therapy
no. No,
or
you
that
don't you can't because it's shaming their image or their, what the crazy thing is, I would challenge that you have depression, PTSD, and OCD because those are all the symptoms of PTSD.
really.
Yeah, people that have, so PTSD comes with depression and anxiety. It comes with it, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things that's not talked about with PTSD is the need for perfection, because you want predictability, because you're so used to unpredictability. You're so used to things changing all the time that you
Well,
want certain things a certain way. That's why the fork in the sink drives you crazy, because you're like, this fork should not be in the sink. It should be clean, right?
yeah.
Like, that's why if your husband or somebody in the house leaves a mess somewhere, it drives you off the wall. No, you're not crazy. Your body and your mind just want predictability, and mess resemble unpredictability.
Yes, and it's hard when you have a kid because
Mhm.
they're messy,
And
like,
it's unpredictable at all times.
all the time, and it hit me hard because, I was trying to, like, cope with it, but then I had Grayson
Mm-hmm.
and the baby blues, and again, I thought I was psychotic. I was like, "What is wrong with me?" Like, I was screaming at people, like, nuts, off the
Yeah.
wall. I felt like I lost control because I wasn't sleeping.
Yep.
Now it was on his schedule, his timing, all for him, and even
Yep.
now as a toddler, like, it's all about him, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I hate to say it, but I'm like, "No, I'm the boss, like, I'm the mom, you should listen to me, like, we're going on my schedule," and it doesn't work that way, like, it's all
Mm-hmm.
on their schedule, and it's so hard to, like, cope, not necessarily cope with that, but, like, kinda just deal with it because I'm like, "Y'all, like, I just want him to follow my schedule. Like, I want him to
Right.
listen to me. I want him to be clean." And I'm like, but he's a kid.
Yep.
And you learn patience and all the things. But when you
Yep.
suffer from something already and you're still trying to work through that trauma and then you have a
Mm-hmm.
kid, it's just so
Yeah.
hard. I feel like
Yeah.
it's so hard.
It's dealing. So, like, again, like, PTSD is all about having control. Like, it's all about having control. Like, I need to have control because I didn't have control before. And so that's why the OCD comes in place. And anyways, I can get really nerdy about that. But, you know, when you have a child, you don't have control. And so, like, that is the paradox, right? Like, there is a paradox between, like, being a mom and struggling with mental health, especially PTSD, and, like, and I would challenge even to say, I guarantee that your parents had that too. Because this is how trauma changes your brain. And that's why we can't rationalize, why did you think this was okay? So, let's think about instinctively, your brain is wired to survive, right? Like, think about caveman days. Like, you're constantly looking for danger, you're wired to survive, right? So when you're wired to survive, did you know that the part of your brain that makes rational decisions is shut down? It shuts
Yeah.
down. So you have an inability at that moment, when you feel triggered and when you feel like you're in danger, to make very impulsive decisions, and decisions that you can't think through at that moment. And so when your brain doesn't know the difference between this is an actual threat or this is a trigger. So, like I said, my child is screaming in my head, right? My brain processes that that's a threat. Somebody's yelling, why, it's tied to being yelled at and screamed at my whole life and military, right? And in my head, it's like, no, I need to respond, right? It gives me anxiety. I want to, my head doesn't know, your brain does not know to process the difference. And so this is why you make dumb decisions when you're stressed. This is why I'm going to re-traumatize my kids and do what was happening to me. That's my instinct. That's all I know. So when you're stressed and triggered, the instinctive part of your brain kicks in, and it's only what it knows to do, which is what you've been exposed to and the patterns that have been, like, exposed in your life. Crazy. It's
I
crazy.
didn't, yeah. And it's crazy to me because, like, my mom, she swears that she's not like her mom. Like, she's like, there's no way. I am not Abuelita. Like, there's no way. But then I see them and I'm like, y'all are the same. Like, you are just following how she would respond and how she reacted to certain things. And
Mm-hmm.
then when I was growing up, I responded the same way. Like, and it's crazy to even say because I'm like, man, a lot of the decisions I made back in the day were because of lack of love and lack of attention and lack of, like, all the things that you just, because she didn't grow up with that. Like, she
Mm-hmm.
just thought that was normal. Like, and now she's still, like, bless her heart, she just doesn't say I love you. She's not affectionate. I don't think she's ever said I love you more than 3 times in my whole life. But she'll say it to my son. Like, she's
Yep.
like, I love you, baby. Like, you're my whole world in
Let's
this.
talk about how much that hurts.
Ah,
Oh my good.
it's hard.
Look.
Him.
Oh my god.
about me? Like,
Right.
child. And she's like, no, that's the babe. He's my baby. He's my whole world. I want the best for him. And I'm like,
I
dude,
wasn't your baby. What?
I wasn't.
Right.
And I'm like, he looks just like me. Like,
Yeah.
serious? And she
Hmm.
treats him like the best thing in the world. And I have
Hmm.
siblings, and we're all like looking at each other like, what is going on? Like, she's treating him better than she's treating like she's ever treated us. And like, it's hard to break that cycle because I
Hmm.
guess that is that threatened, trigger. Because when he does certain things, I get very like, I panic, I get overstimulated, I get triggered.
Yeah.
And my instinct is to respond the way that my mom would respond
Correct.
back in the day. And, but there's something that stops me from
Hmm.
doing it.
Yeah.
And because I've always tell myself, I'm like, I do not want to be my mom. I do not want to respond the same way that my mom responded to certain situations.
Yeah.
And, it stops, but I'm still learning. And so,
Yeah.
like, my response, like you said, I walk away. Like,
Hmm.
I'm just like, I can't do this right now. I'll walk away. And
Hmm.
Josh is so confused by it because he wasn't raised that way. So he doesn't know why I'm doing the things that I'm doing because
Hmm.
he had a great childhood. He had a
Hmm.
healthy childhood.
Hmm.
Great family, great parents, love them, like beautiful. I wish I was raised in that family. But he's a white guy, like, and
Yeah.
they're all about love and dinner and like all the affection and hey, I'm going to tell
Hmm.
you I love you a million times a day and talk to you multiple times a day. I'm like, my mom talks to me once a week.
Maybe.
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 Me, like how she asked how my son's doing. Like, how's
Right.
Grayson? I'm like, hi, I'm
I'm
Liz.
Gretel. I exist.
Thanks for asking how I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's crazy how we're raised so differently. And I'm like, when will it stop? Like,
Hmm.
when will, like, are we just now going to break that cycle?
Hmm.
Like,
Yeah.
will it ever break?
Yeah.
It blows my mind.
Yeah, I think it's possible, and it's hard because like it does start with being intentional because it's instinctive. It's instinctive because it's embedded in you were what you knew was normal as a kid. Like when you're a kid, everything you're exposed to, that's what normal is. You don't know normal until somebody outside of you is like, "Hey, that's not okay." So like, working CPS taught me that. I've had kids that were like sexually abused by their parents, kids that were severely beaten by their parents, and still don't understand why we have to remove them from that situation until somebody's like, hey, you know, because that's your normal. And so that gets programmed in your brain. And so let's not to get too nerdy, but your brain makes connections
Mhm.
subconsciously. So when you think about it, you're repeating things. So like your brain is like, oh, family, parent, child. This is what it's supposed to look like. So it grabs what you knew, right? And so this is why all of a sudden, like when people are, they're great when they're dating, and then when they get married, it's like almost like a switch sometimes, or when they live together, and it's like, why are the dynamics changing? Because your brain made that switch, like, oh, family, this is what it's supposed to look like, and you go right back to what you did. And so it starts with recognizing, like, oh, these are the patterns that are playing out that are automatic, and being very intentional about recognizing it and stopping, like, okay, stop. Like I literally worked a very long time just to just shut up before somebody says something. Like I would be really quick to respond to my husband and like dismiss him, or like say some things, or like yell at my son like stop, like like he doesn't know what the hell's going on. He's a kid, like he's like a 2-year old, like he doesn't know. But that was instinctive, so I had to literally stop when I felt myself, stop. Stop.
It's hard. It is
Yeah.
so hard when you've done that literally your whole entire life. You've always
Correct.
been defensive. You've always been on edge. You've always been
Correct. You're
I don't
taught to
know.
be that way. You are
Yeah.
taught to be that way. It's
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 hard.
crazy.
How do you It's hard because it becomes like a habit. And I hate to say that it's a habit, but it's hard to break because it's literally what you've known your whole entire life.
Yeah.
And then you do it, and then like Josh is always like, what is wrong with you? Like, I'm like, dude,
You don't get it. You don't understand. Okay.
a lot, but let's just talk about it. So it's hard because now, as I'm like kind of growing with Grayson and I'm learning with
Mhm.
Grayson,
Yeah.
and breaking those habits and breaking that cycle, it's so hard. And it's kind of gets frustrating when some people, I see them and they've never gone through trauma and they've never,
Mhm.
been raised a certain way. And, they're healthy. Like they got it going on and they're like raising their kids to be a certain way. And I'm 29 and I'm like learning and relearning and
Yeah.
reprocessing and doing all those things. And so
Yeah.
it's like, I guess, what are your tips to do that? Like, get over that? Because you just said, like, you just kind of like stop yourself, but it's easier said than done, like, just to be able to like do it.
Yeah. So one of the things, well, it's funny. Like I make fun of myself all the time. Like I'm making this app, and I tell people, look, the difference between me and other people is that I lived through it, and I'm actually like moving forward, right? I don't just talk from a theological book
Mm,
standpoint of this is what you should do. And when you think of the nature of trauma, um, it literally changes your perception of the world, perception of safety, perception of connection and intimacy. You know, I think it starts with understanding how you have changed and starting one to accept where you are. I think a lot of us are so hard on ourselves, or we just completely ignore it and pretend like it's not there. And that stops us from growth. And it's like, you know what? No, this is where I am today. But I'm going to make a and a very intentional effort to start acknowledging myself in the good that I am doing. It's like learning how to shift your focus. Because I think a lot of that, damn it, I did it again. I screamed, I did it, da da da. But you did it less than you did last week, right? You did it less than you did yesterday. And so like instead of measuring progress by the things that you have failed in, like I started to look at myself and be like, you know what, like what am I excelling in? Because think about like yourself as a person. Like if we talk about in percentages, think 100%, right? Maybe you don't like 20% of yourself. Why do we focus so much on the 20 versus focusing on the 80 that you're doing good and correct? And I think the more that you focus on the 80, the more it'll grow, right? But be intentional about slowly changing. And so like I had to, when you're also traumatized, you get disconnected from yourself. And so a lot of the time you're living on autopilot. You're just doing, 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 doing. And when I had my kid, it really, really, really taught me to slow down. And I started recognizing I didn't even like my kid. I didn't even know why. I did not know why. I'm not even gonna lie. I loved him. I loved him to pieces. But like when moms, a lot of the moms when they have their babies, it's just like, oh, I'm so in love, blah blah blah. Like that's my baby. Whatever. For me, I'm like, I can't give it back. Like that was the thing that came in my head. Like I'm it. Like if I don't produce milk, he don't eat. If I don't, so I felt more of the weight and the responsibility of what it was like to be a parent, when I had him, rather than the feelings. And I'm just like, damn, there's something wrong with me. But then I had to start analyzing and thinking, and I engaged in, I still do therapy for myself. I have my own therapist. And I did this therapy that helps you focus on like what connections are made with that, right? And it's really awesome. I love, it's called EMDR, and I specialize in that. And I love that therapy because it teaches you how your brain makes connections that you had no idea was related to it. So when we did that process, my brain connected my son to my older brother, which wasn't the healthiest relationship at that time because he looked like him, the first child, the first, you know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, my brother was a first child. And so those negative feelings were attached to my son. And I had no idea. Yeah. And like once I had that revelation, once that like it like kind of helped. That's why I said accept where you are. Like stop fighting. Like the reality is I don't like my son right now, but I have to acknowledge that first before I can make improvements.
mhm.
And now it's like that's my little boo thing, like I love him to pieces, but like I had to acknowledge that because and it didn't hit me until I had my daughter. Because with my daughter, it was like, oh, my princess, and I was like, whoa, like, hold on.
It's different.
Why do I feel different here? And I'm not ashamed of saying this. And if he sees it one day, that's okay. That's perfectly fine. This is the reality of things. And he knows that I love him. But I never stopped loving him. And the reason is that's why I said that you're disconnected. PTSD disconnects you and trauma disconnects you was because in my head, I knew that I loved him, but my heart didn't feel it. And a lot of the times you don't feel when you have trauma and PTSD, those things get disconnected. And so you feel like compartmentalized and you don't understand yourself because all I know is anger and annoyance. I don't feel anything else other than being angry and annoyed and irritated most of the
Time. And I feel, and it's crazy because a lot of moms are afraid to admit it, but like at least with me, when I gave birth to Grayson, I didn't want to hold him.
time.
Like I was like, he's beautiful. Like take him, take him wherever y'all need to go. Like I'm good. And
Mm-hmm.
they were like, no, you need to hold him. And I remember holding him, and I didn't feel that spark, that
Yeah.
the instant connection, the bond that everyone talked about. That they were
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, this is such a blessing. And love this little bundle marshmallow to death.
Mm-hmm.
I remember once we got home and I really started like bonding with him, like that was when I was like, ah, he's such a blessing. But even then, I was like, this is my responsibility. Like for the rest of his life, the rest of my life, like he is my responsibility. I cannot mess this up. And it was a lot of stress.
Yeah.
And then you deal with postpartum, and you have a million cajillion people telling you this is how you raise them. This is how you do things. Blah 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 blah. And I'm like, y'all,
Yeah.
shut up. Like,
Yeah.
I do not need input from anybody right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hard because people. It's hard to admit that sometimes you just don't like your kid, and like it sucks. And sometimes I'm like, I didn't want to have a second kid for a really long time, and they're like, "What's
Mm-hmm.
wrong with you? Like, why not?"
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, "Well, there's plenty of reasons why not."
Right.
It's just it's hard. It's hard to like admit that, and it's hard to accept where you are sometimes because it's just like, what the hell is wrong with me? Like,
Mm-hmm.
why am I the way that I am? And then you
Yeah.
have people saying like, man, something definitely is wrong with you. And you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what's wrong with me until you start working with a therapist and they start
Mm-hmm.
making like, ooh, this is why you are the way that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And then at least for me, I got more angry when I
Mm-hmm.
was making those connections and
Mm-hmm.
figuring things out and figuring out this is the reason why you're
Yeah.
angry or
Yeah.
why you get triggered or why like, and I'm like, what? Like
Mm-hmm.
pissed off. And
Yeah.
it's just hard. I don't know.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I think for a long time, I had a hard time accepting the word trauma. I'm like, I ain't been traumatized. Ain't no wrong with me. Like, I'm fine. I'm strong. I'm independent. Like, I work. I have straight A's. I have a 4.0 GPA. You can't tell me nothing.
Yeah.
Especially us high performing anxiety PTSD people, because a lot of people, some people can go either direction, right? And I don't think it gets highlighted enough. The people that are high achieving PTSD, because most of the time when you look at depression, if people think about somebody not wanting to get out of bed,
Mhm.
somebody like that doesn't want to do anything. But what happens when my whole room is clean and I look like there's nothing wrong with me?
Mhm.
What happens? I didn't even know for the longest time I was depressed. I didn't know. I did not know, because I was like, I'm fine. I function. I brush
Mhm.
my teeth. I take showers. I
Yep.
have, I'm going to grad school. I'm working full time. I take care of my bills. Like, I'm not depressed.
Yep.
And it's hidden. It comes in. I didn't know until when my therapist was like, no, you have PTSD, and depression comes with that. And I started analyzing, and I'm like, oh, I don't do the things that I love to do.
Mhm.
Oh, I don't go out and meet people. I don't want to talk to people. I don't. It was hidden. It was
Mhm.
very subtle. It wasn't like there was something overtly wrong with me.
Mhm.
And I challenge a lot of my, because I know how to detect it, because I was one of them. You know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? And I'm just like, when's the last time you did something that you loved? When's the last time that, like, I love to read books. I didn't read a book. I hadn't read books in years. Like, and it felt like for a period of my life, like, like I had went through like a abusive ex-husband. I had joined the military and I got sexually assaulted. Then I had a miscarriage, all in a matter of span of like 5 years. It was crazy. And so I'm fine. I'm depressed. I'm strong. I'm a soldier. Can't tell me I can't move on, do nothing. I can work, and it's so hidden, especially too, like, I everybody else that knew me, nobody would know. Nobody would look at me and be like, yeah, Joe's going through all these things. Like, I'm pretty sure you never knew anything that I went through when I was in high school, and
Yeah.
I didn't know yours, right? Because you're high
Yeah.
functioning.
Well, yeah, because I mean, with you, you were so happy, so positive, like everyone loved you. Like there was no doubt in my mind. Well, now as an adult, like you realize the things, you're like you see the little things, but no one ever guessed that. Even now as an adult, people are like, "Oh, you're depressed? Oh, you suffer from anxiety." But your house is always clean. You always look presentable.
Hmm.
You're happy, like you talk to people. And I'm like, "Yeah, but once everyone's gone, once everyone leaves, I'm done
Hmm.
for. Like I
Yeah.
don't want to talk to anybody. I just want to cuddle up in bed." And it's true, like one of my therapists said like you should stem back to like when you were truly happy in
Hmm.
your childhood and what you did that made you truly happy. And my thing was volunteering,
Hmm.
reading,
Hmm.
doing anything outdoors, hiking, like
Yep.
cooking, listening to jazz music, classical music. And then he was like, "When was the last time you did all that?" And I was like, "Back when I was
Yeah.
a kid." Like,
Hmm.
it's like, yeah, like that
Yeah.
shows a lot. And
And you
he was
don't
like,
realize you're depressed. Like, you really don't. I didn't realize I was depressed until I was like 24, 25. I don't know. Like, I didn't. I didn't. And then after the assault is when I got diagnosed with PTSD. That was like the icing on the cake. Like, that was like the camel. I'm like, huh, just another thing that happened in my life, like. And when you're so used to things going wrong, when you're so used to like abuse, when you're so used to like, it's just, oh, that's just another thing that you add to your bucket of like, this is just life. And we normalize it. Why do we normalize it? It's almost like we glamorize trauma in our minority communities. My mom would slap me in the face with a bell. Which one? What did yours throw pain at you too? What?
it's like we were comparing who like or who did the same thing. Like my mom did the broom, the sandal, like all the things, or spatula, whatever she could find. And everyone's like, "What? My mom did that." I'm like, "This isn't normal." Like we should
Yes.
not
We
talk
just laugh about it though. We're like, just like, oh, that's fine. What
about
did yours do? Like, what happened?
yeah. And it's funny because like it's not funny, but they talk about it now and they're like, "But you're fine. Look at you
Right.
now." Like,
Correct.
yeah, like you're
Yeah.
great. You're a business owner. You're a mom. Like you look great. Like there's nothing. There's no trauma there. I'm like, what? Like, of course there's trauma.
Hmm.
That's where
And
like,
what's crazy, you know, what's how you mentioned like, you're like, oh, everybody loved you in school, like you were
mhm,
happy, outgoing, whatever. I had no option but to be happy at school.
wow.
When you think about it, right? Like, I don't want to go home. I don't want to go deal with that nonsense, right? I'm gonna find a space where I can, right? And that's the crazy thing, is that's what teaches you to put on that mask. That's what teaches you like, I have no option but to be. I think academics and school was like my escape. Sports was my escape, and that's why I excelled at it, because I'm like, that was my coping skill. And so that you have all these people then as adults that are workaholics and
Mhm.
addicted to work and addicted to performance, because they had no option but to be good at something, because at
Yep.
home you weren't good at anything, because at home you were the problem, because at home, you know what I'm saying? And I'm not saying you were, but that's how it was perceived. That's how people treat you, right? And so the dynamics are, and then even at school I got hate for that. Oh, you think you're all this. And I'm like, man, y'all don't know I have the lowest self-esteem. Y'all would never guess it though. You would never guess it though. That's why I
Yeah.
ended up being in an abusive relationship, because I just let people treat me however, whenever, however, because that was normal. That was normal for me. It was normal for friends to treat me negatively and me still be there, right? Because you're taught loyalty to your parents even when they don't treat you right. So I'm gonna be loyal to people that don't treat me right.
Mhm.
And it's a
And
cycle.
it's a cycle. It is a freaking cycle because I remember once that high school was done, I went back to Puerto Rico for college and I
Mm-hmm.
was like, Puerto Rican, like, these are my people, whatever. And I got into an abusive relationship, but he took care of me.
Yep.
He paid my bills, he bought me stuff, and it was the most toxic relationship. But I was like, but it's okay. I've been through
Yep.
worse,
Yep.
like my parents were like that, like
Yes.
we're good, like it's normal, but it's not. And so
Mm-hmm.
I remember it got to a point where, he almost tried killing me. And even then I was like,
I survived.
I didn't do it. So like it's cool because, my mom, never helped me. She never took care of me. Like I hear stories where, they're like, I still live with my parents. My parents are paying for college. Parents are doing XYZ. Or they bought me a car. They bought me this. And I was like,
That's
y'all,
cute.
that's awesome. I had a struggle. I bought a cheap ass little Jeep that did sometimes would not make it to point A to point B. And I
Hmm.
struggled. It didn't even have AC. And I lived in Puerto Rico. Like
Yeah.
I struggled and like no one understands that. And that puts me to a mindset of I can do things myself now. Like I'm very, very independent. I do not need you. I do not need you at all. I don't need anybody. Like I got this. And it sucks because, your partner then gets sucked into that
Yeah.
because every little fight, every little disagreement I have with him, I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah.
Deuces. Like I
Yeah.
don't even want to deal with it. It's the
Hmm.
flight. Like I don't even want to try to argue. I don't even want to try to
Yep.
make things work. And it could be for the silliest things. And
Yes.
still working on it, but
I think we're all, and when you have kids, that's only exacerbated because when you are so used, like I said, I didn't like, I had a miscarriage, and then like my son was more of a, like, if it happens, it's fine. You know what I'm saying? Like it wasn't anything crazy. Um, the ability, what's crazy is there's a paradox of like, I'm super fiercely independent because of trauma, and but I'm also terrified and don't trust my own decision making, right? And
yeah.
so when I got married with my now husband, I even then I was like, am I making the right choice? And I told myself the only way I will marry this man or anybody else is if everybody in my family gives it a green light, because I don't trust myself. I'm so serious. And that happened. And I never, when I tell you that has never been a thing, I set like a standard and God was like, it was just for me a funny situation. And so then, like you said, anytime I would, we would get into an argument, it's like, I want you, I don't need you. Right. What does
Mhm.
that tell the person that you're with? Right. Or every single time, like I just could not handle that conflict because I'm tired of fighting. Damn, my whole life I've been fighting. Can we just not fight? Like
Yeah.
I'm sick and tired of fighting, and then it's just like I would leave. Like I wouldn't leave for days. I wouldn't leave for nothing, but I would have to leave the house because if I stay here, I'm gonna punch you in the face. Like that's exactly the thoughts that go through my head. Right. And so then I'm like, to preserve the relationship, I gotta go. Right. And so one of the biggest things, and like he grounds me so well because he's the opposite. Like one of the biggest arguments, and I will never forget, he said, at least I don't leave you. I don't leave you. And I just started crying. Like I'm still emotional about it because I'm just like, man, like he grounds me so well. And to be, I think my husband is the first person in my life that has represented safety, you know and grounding. And I love him because of that. Because even when I'm sitting here in my crazy, like he knows, like he's like, she's having a moment. I don't disrespect him, don't get me wrong. Like I've learned how to put boundaries on myself. We all talk about putting boundaries on everybody else, but we need to put boundaries on ourselves and our limitations. And I know that my limitation is I can get triggered really easily, with certain things, right? And so I have to realize, if my anger to this instance is disproportionate, I know it's not him. I know it's me. So I've had to learn to recognize those things. And I've
Yeah.
had to stop blaming him for my triggers.
Yeah.
Now, I do talk about, hey, you know how you contribute. So
Yeah.
if you don't want to contribute, maybe we can do these things. But it's also taking ownership. And when you have kids, that fierce independence kind of goes away because what happens when I need help? What happens when I have to ask you, like, hey, I just can't, like, I can't today. Can you please help me? That's
And that's
hard.
because we grew up ask like we weren't allowed to ask for help. Like at
Correct.
least like they were like, help, what's help?
And
You
you're the
better
mom,
yeah.
right? Or they would say, I did it by myself. Why do you need
Yeah.
help?
Which is crazy because I'm like, no, you didn't actually, but sure, let's have that conversation. But then you struggle and then you're raised up that way, like you're not allowed to ask for help, even with homework. They're like,
Yes.
you got this. You're the
Figure it
one
out.
going to school, figure it out. And so asking for help was such a hard thing for me. And when Grayson was born, I never asked for help.
Yeah.
Like I was like, I was so like just stuck up, like stubborn. I was like, I do not need to ask for help, even though I was struggling. Like
Yes.
I needed the help and I would not ask for help. Now Grayson's 2, and
Hmm.
I just started asking for help. But then I would blame Josh for things
Yeah.
I wouldn't even communicate with him.
Yes.
I would be like resentful for things I never even brought up in a conversation because I
Yes.
was like, I don't even want to fight. And
Yeah.
it was not even a fight. Like he was like, babe, you could have just told me, like there's no
Mhm.
argument behind it. But my mind always went to, if I say anything in a negative, not even a negative light, but just a different tone or anything like that,
Mhm.
it's gonna bring up a fight, which means we're probably gonna fight for hours. Like it was
Mhm.
because I was raised that way.
Yep.
If I told my mom or my dad that I didn't like something, it always ended up in an argument. They would get
Yes.
defensive. It would become a
Yep.
thing. And so my mind is wired to, if I
You
bring
don't have
something,
needs.
yeah,
You don't have
like,
needs.
yeah. And so I'm like,
You're not allowed to have a voice in how things in reciprocal relationships. Like it's only me. Yeah.
yeah, all the time. And so I'm like, and even my mom to this day, she won't admit it. I'm like, you were crazy. Like, you would make me feel like I could just not talk to you. And she's like, you could talk to me all the time. I'm like, no, we tried. My whole life. We tried. And I was like, even now, I'm telling you, you made me feel this way. And you're
Mhm.
telling me no.
And denying, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah. It's there's a lack, and I think it starts with us. This is why, like, we have to make the difference and the change. And like kids, man, like they will bring it out. Like whatever you have not worked on, they will bring it out of you. I always tell that to people. I'm like, marriage and kids will bring it out of you. They sure
Oh,
will. And it
mhm.
doesn't have to be marriage. If you're living with somebody and you're committed to that person, it will bring it out of you. Like, and a lot of the times we have a hard time separating between what's my junk, what's your junk, what's our junk, because we project. And our thoughts, our perception is this happened before, so it's gonna, man, I can't tell you how many times me and my husband would have a discussion about, like, he'd be like, I already know how this is gonna end. I'm like, you haven't even given me the opportunity. I'm like, what do you mean? Because he's so used to certain things going a certain way in his family, right? And so I'm like, look, I am not these people that have contributed to this. I'm like, okay, God. I would end up saying that to like get on him, like, okay, God, you know what I'm gonna do, right?
Yeah.
Like, and so then like he had to learn how to like humble himself a little bit and give me the opportunity to either prove him right or wrong, right? Because when we make assumptions of how something's going to end up without communicating, a lot of the times we create our own problems that aren't even there. Like,
That's my thing all the time. Let it be like, you should read my mind. And he's like, babe, I can't, no one can read your mind. And I'm like, you should learn. You need
you
to
should
learn.
know. You should
Yeah.
know what I need. You should know what I want. Like, you know how much that sets us up for failure?
All the time. And so, and I feel so bad for him looking back when we first started dating and when we first started living together. I'm like, this poor man, this poor man going, because he's never been with someone who's gone through so much trauma. So here I am, and I'm like,
Yep.
hey, what's up?
Yep.
And, then we started living together, and there were certain things that triggered me. There were certain things that I would be like, dude, like, don't touch me or don't get too close. Like, it was so many different things, and he was learning about it. And
Mhm.
it was shocking for him. And he grounds
Yes.
like the same way. He grounds me. He knows now like what's triggering, what's not. And
Mhm.
I'm trying to work on my communication because I know you can't read my mind. I will try to talk to you. Like, and
Yeah.
even now there are things where he's like, babe, talk to me. I'm like, I don't want to, but I need to know it's not all about me. Like,
Mhm.
because it was all about my parents. I'm like, it can't be all about me. Like, I really need to think about him and how he's feeling
Yes.
too.
And it's
Yes.
hard. It's hard because there's an extreme too. Like then it's like my whole life it's been about everybody else. When do I get my chance? Right? Like that's the thing that comes up, like in relationships. And like you're right. Like there's this anger that comes up when you realize and you understand. You're like, oh. But again, if we understand how they just pass it down, right? Like because they don't know no better, and it's not excusing their behavior, but it can provide an environment for understanding, right? So that we can know you were just acting on instinct and autopilot because it was done to you, and the touch thing. Oh my goodness, like when your discipline is nothing but physical,
Yep.
How hard, and I don't think we know how to explain this until you start understanding like overstimulation with touch. People that are overly disciplined physically do not want nobody to be touching them unless it's having sex. And even then, like,
It's
it's
yeah.
like there are boundaries, and or it's like extreme, right? Like then you have to ask her, why don't I like being touched? Oh, touch was not really ever a positive thing in my life. So you have to even, I feel like my journey with like learning about PTSD and how it's affected me, I'm like, damn, I'm like learning how to do life. Like I have never, like it's almost like I'm a little kid exploring the world and somebody like having to teach myself like how to live because you don't know how to live. You know how to survive. And there's a big difference.
And it's horrible because then you're having to like learn all over again. And it's the touching, it's so true. And he never knew the word overstimulated. So
Mm-hmm.
when I started using it, when I learned it myself and I started like using the word, because I'll be like, babe, I'm overstimulated. Please don't touch me. He's like, what does that
Mm-hmm.
even mean? He's like, why don't you want me to touch you? Like, I'm your man, all the things.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's hard to explain it to him because I'm like, I've been the negative light, like being touched in a bad way all my life up
Mm-hmm.
until I met him, like sexually and just physically. Like, I don't like it and I get triggered. There have been times where, like, in the moment of, intimacy,
Mm-hmm.
he does the slightest thing off,
You're like,
and
eh.
I'm just like, get off me. Like,
Yeah.
he's like, what? And I'm like, get off me. You go crazy. And it's just the littlest things. And it's so triggering and you're learning and all the things. But man, I mean, the trauma, like, it really just messed us up.
Yeah.
Like, and we're still learning and we're
Mm-hmm.
adults and we're
Yeah.
still processing and we're still figuring it out. And it's sad because I feel like our family, our parents will never ever acknowledge it.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
deep down inside, I'm like, I want you to, but I know it will never happen.
They
So,
may, maybe one day, right? Like I think we're learning a lot more. And sometimes um what's interesting about trauma is that connection hurts, right? The connection also heals. And so you have this paradox of like, I don't want to connect, but if you were touched, right,
mm,
abused physically, right, it will take a positive physical touch to replace those memories in your brain. It's almost like a file. You have a filing cabinet of negative touch, and you have to level out the filing cabinet, right? That's how the brain works. And so, in order, I'm not saying like go do crazy stuff, but I understood that with my child. Like, even when my kid gives me a hug or like I am like changing a diaper, like, certain thoughts come to head because especially if you've been sexually abused, like, oh, I don't want to, and you're so careful or you're so whatever, um, you have to allow yourself to be exposed slowly to those things. I have to allow my husband to embrace me sometimes, even though it makes me uncomfortable because I know that's replacing that. Right. And I have my limits, don't get me wrong, right? And like now he's like a lot more cuddly and like I think we've reached that in our relationship where now we know each other and now I love him. It took me so long to learn to love him and now I feel like I genuinely love him. You know what I'm saying? Like in each other. It's not the infatuation. It's not the like, oh, I'm like, oh, you're perfect. It's not. It's like we learn to love each other even through our flaws and he's more affectionate now and it still makes me cringe sometimes but I've had to learn I have to allow him to be affectionate so my brain can interpret this is safe, this is okay.
wow,
Crazy
that's crazy.
paradox.
Yeah, it's just, I feel like we could go on and on about this for like ever because there's just so much with the trauma and, everything you're saying is just so true. And I'm like, yes, like it makes sense. And again, we could go on forever, but to kind of wrap things up, what are your best tips and advice for moms that, are struggling with mental health or just trauma in general that are now they're mothers. So they
Yeah,
have to like work through all that while being mothers or working or doing whatever they're doing. What do you like what's your best advice?
balance between the me and the us. What do I mean? You have needs apart from being a mom,
Yeah.
you have needs apart from being a spouse or a person, and in order for you to heal you need to meet those needs so that you can be better and effective with the people around you. Like, take time. I don't care what anybody says. Like, it is so important to take time for yourself, even if it's just 5 minutes of, I'm going to acknowledge where I'm at. I'm going to accept where I am. You don't have to like it. And the more you deny something, the more you're not going to get through and the more you're going to be frustrated. Be honest with yourself and understand that you were a person before you became a mom, before you became a spouse, and you have those needs that need to be met so that you can heal, so that you can be better. Accept where you are so that you can move forward. There's no way to move forward and be effective if you don't accept.
That's amazing. And I think I'm going to take that tip for myself too. Um, yeah, I appreciate you, being part of this podcast and giving all your tips and tricks because I feel like this one would definitely be helpful because I feel like now moms are being more open with mental health. At least like with my group of friends, like now we're talking about it more, being more open, like it's not shameful or
Mm-hmm.
embarrassing to talk about it or even ask for help, which
Yeah.
is hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much. Anything else you would like to share?
No, I just appreciate, you having me here in the space. And, I look forward to, maybe future conversations or whatever it is that, we come up with. But it was really fun. I like doing
Yeah,
this.
it was great. Thanks so much for thanks so much for joining and being part of this. And I hope that we have more episodes together.
Yeah.